It's now September 1597, and the pieces for Hideyoshi's second invasion of Korea are now in place. A huge Japanese army is massed on the south coast, and the Korean Navy under Won Kyun has been almost completely destroyed, clearing the way for the Japanese Navy to reach the Yellow Sea. That means it's time for the advance inland to begin. As always, please support my channel by hitting those subscribe and like buttons. And thank you to all who have already subscribed. Here's how things stand in southern Korea in September 1597. The Japanese invasion force that has returned to Korea numbers approximately 141,000 men, almost as large as in the first invasion. 121,000 of these are ground troops. The rest, about 20,000, are sailors in the Japanese Navy. Korean forces consist of government troops, Webyung volunteer units, and monk soldier units scattered about in various towns and mountain fortresses that the Koreans have spent the last several years rebuilding and strengthening. As for Chinese forces, much of the great army that had been sent to Korea during the first invasion has now been withdrawn to Liaodong province to guard China's northeast frontier. Still remaining in Korea are 3,000 Ming troops at Namwon, 2,000 at Chonju, 1,000 in Seoul under Chinese Commander-in-Chief Ma Gui, General Li Rusong's replacement, and a few more thousand further north in Pyongyang. Mobilization has already begun back in China to raise a new army to meet the Japanese threat, but it will be months before it reaches Korea. So, why are the Japanese still hanging around Pusan? Why haven't they begun their advance? Because they're waiting for Korea's rice crop to be ready to harvest. They're intending to seize this rice for themselves, to feed their men through the upcoming campaign. That's why their advance begins with the thrust into Cholla province, because Cholla is where the bulk of Korea's rice is grown. To pave the way, the Japanese issue a proclamation to the Koreans, ordering the farmers of Cholla to remain in their fields and promising death to everyone else. This throws Cholla into a panic. Local officials go into hiding or flee into the hills. Army officers destroy their own weapons and abandon their posts and their men. When the Japanese arrive, they will encounter little Korean resistance. D-Day is September 11th, 1597. That's when the Japanese begin their inland advance. Their forces are divided into two armies. A left army of 49,600 men under the overall command of Ukita Hideye and including Konishi Naga's contingent, and a right army of 65,300 men under the overall command of Mori Hidemoto and including Kato Kiyomasa's contingent. The left army strikes west toward Namwon, garrisoned by 3,000 Ming troops under General Yang Yuan and 1,000 Koreans of the Cholla army. Some of these advancing Japanese troops march overland from Pusan. Others are ferried by ship along the coast and up the Somjin River to be landed just 10 kilometers outside the city. With the Korean Navy now effectively destroyed, the Japanese Navy is free to assist with the assault. There are no Korean ships to stop them. The Battle of Namwon rages for several days. The 4,000 Chinese and Korean defenders inside the walls don't stand a chance, not against an army of almost 50,000. General Yang Yuan, wounded twice by musket fire, escapes with only 100 men. The Cholla army commander and his entire force are killed, along with every civilian who had taken shelter inside. The Japanese Right Army, meanwhile, is sweeping west into Cholla province along a more northerly route. It takes the Korean-held mountain fortress of Hwangseok-sansong, but is too late to assist with the taking of Namwon, a great disappointment to Kato Kiyomasa. Instead, it swings north toward the town of Chonju, held by a force of 2,000 Ming soldiers. The Japanese arrive to find the city deserted. Ming General Chen Yuzhong has pulled his men out of the city and is now retreating north. The Right Army now starts to fan out, securing the northern half of Cholla province and continuing north to take the city of Chonju in Chungcheong province. In Seoul, meanwhile, panic is gripping the city. Ming Commander-in-Chief Ma Gui musters a force of 8,000 men, including the retreating Chonju garrison and Namwon survivors, and sets out south to meet the Japanese. As the Japanese are making their advance, they're being far more brutal than in the first invasion. As we previously saw, Hideyoshi's purpose this time isn't really conquest. It's to punish the Koreans and to send a message both to the Chinese and to Hideyoshi's own people that this is what happens to anyone who resists him. His orders to his invading army are to, quote, mow down everyone, young and old, men and women, and send the heads to Japan. This bit about sending heads to Japan was not meant to be taken literally. Cargoes of human heads would have filled up whole ships. In practice, what the Japanese did in Korea was to cut off the noses of corpses. Nose collection stations are set up throughout southern Korea during this campaign to gather and count these grisly trophies and to issue receipts to unit commanders. Here are a few of these nose receipts that have survived to this day. To quote a couple examples: 2. Kuroda Nagamasa. Noses from 23 enemy dead, slain in battle, taken and duly recorded. Signed, Kumagai Naomori, 1597, 8th month, 16th day. 2. Kikawa Hiroye. Total number of noses taken, verified as 792. Signed, Hayakawa Nagamasa, 1597, 9th month, 4th day. After being collected and counted, these cut-off noses were then salted and packed in barrels and shipped back to Japan as per Hideyoshi's orders. They would be subsequently buried under a mound in Kyoto. Here's how that mound looks today. It was initially called the Hanazuka, or Mound of Noses. Several decades after the war, this was thought to sound too cruel, so the monument was rechristened the Mimizuka, the Mound of Ears. It's estimated that 38,000 Korean noses are buried here. In addition to massacring Koreans and cutting off their noses, the Japanese took thousands of captives during their second invasion. These unfortunates were sent back to Japan and put to work or sold into slavery. Many of these Korean slaves ended up in the slave market at Nagasaki. An Italian merchant named Francesco Carletti has left us a record of his visit to this market, where he bought 5 Korean slaves for the modern equivalent of just a few $100s. He set 4 of them free in India on his way home and took the 5th, known to us only by his Western name, Antonio Correa, to Italy, where he disappeared. Back in Japan, a number of Korean potters taken captive during the war would be forcibly resettled on Kyushu and would go on to enrich the Japanese ceramic industry, giving rise to such highly prized styles of pottery as hagi-ware, arita-ware, and satsuma-ware. This connection between Hideyoshi's Korean invasion and Japanese ceramics is why the Japanese sometimes call the Imjin War Yakimono Senso, the Pottery War. Okay, so back to the Japanese advance. They've taken Chonju and then Chonju, and they're getting closer to Seoul. They don't intend to take the capital. Hideyoshi has specifically ordered them not to. The plan is to march up through Chungcheong province, then stop. Chinese General Ma Gui, meanwhile, is heading south from Seoul to stop them. He runs into a vanguard Japanese unit at Chiksan on October 16, 1597. 5,000 men under Kuroda Nagamasa. The two sides fight it out all day, an inconclusive battle. The Chinese, armed with lightweight cannons and muskets, holding their own against Kuroda's men. When the battle resumes the next morning, the arrival of additional Ming forces, 2,000 mounted cavalry, swings the fight in favor of the Chinese. Kuroda's army is driven back, then retreats. The Battle of Chiksan was not a huge defeat for the Japanese. They lost approximately 600 men and inflicted similar casualties on the Chinese. But the clash was the turning point in the second invasion, for it made the intent of the Ming Chinese clear. They weren't going to let Japan grab the southern half of Korea. They were going to fight. And the Chiksan battle was just the beginning. At that very moment, a massive Ming army was being mobilized in the north. The Japanese invading army therefore began to pull back, withdrawing to its chain of forts around Pusan on Korea's south coast. It was in no hurry. It moved slowly, methodically continuing its campaign of death and destruction to fulfill Hideyoshi's orders to punish the Koreans. The Japanese finally reached the south in December 1597 and dug themselves in, preparing for the winter. They left behind them, in southern Korea, mounds of noseless corpses and smoldering ruins. While the Japanese army was invading southern Korea, the Japanese Navy was advancing along Korea's south coast. After ferrying troops from Pusan to assist with the attack on Namwon, Hideyoshi's ships continue west. The plan is to sail around Korea's southwest tip and north into the Yellow Sea to provide further assistance in the conquest of Cholla. There's only one thing standing in the way of this Japanese armada: Korean naval commander Lee Sun-shin and 13 ships. That's next. Stay tuned.